Hello and welcome to the Touchstones tapes, the podcast where you can explore, discover and keep up to date with Rochdale's historic museum as it undergoes a huge redevelopment project. It's Katie in the studio.
And it's Rick recording from my home in Rochdale.
And it's Bryan here in the collection store. So on this month's episode, we're talking about an exhibition and project called Whose Voice, and the element of that project called Echoes. It was part of an exhibition, and the project challenged and explored the gaps within our museum collections and some of the underrepresented communities within there. The project was about addressing this. So on our roundtable today, we have some of the lovely people who were involved in this project and exhibition. And they are the lovely Liz Mytton, who is Creative Director of Theatre in Flow, Olga Kurtianyk, who is the chair of the Association of Ukrainians in Great Britain for the Rochdale branch, and Sarah Hodgkinson, who is the senior curator for collections and exhibitions at Touchstones Rochdale. How are we all today? Thank you for coming on.
Very well, thank you.
Very well, thank you.
Good, thanks, Bryan.
Good. I'm glad you're all good. It's really good to have you here. And we've asked you all to select an object, either a personal object or an object from our collections. We wanted to give you a bit of space to link that to the theme around some of the challenges within representation, within collections. So whoever wants to go first, because I can see these fascinating objects in front of me and I'm really excited to learn more about them.
I'll go. I've brought two pysanki, which are decorated Ukrainian Easter eggs. And the reason I brought these is because they are a very important part of Ukrainian culture. We usually just do them at Easter, and it's very much a batik process of decorating an egg. So you'll start off with a white egg, and you'll put whatever design you want on in white. Then you dip the egg in your first colour, which is normally yellow. So you start off from light to dark. Then you block out the bits that you want in yellow. Then you dip into the next colour, which is usually an orange. Then you'll again block out what you want in orange. And then you go to your next colour and so forth until you've got your design done. There is symbolism around the designs. This one I've got in my hand is actually one that was done for Christmas, which is unusual. So it's snowflakes. But there are crosses and stars, which have got a lot of Christianity symbolism. To take the wax off, you have to sit with beside a candle and just take the wax off gently. And then you blow the egg so there's nothing left. And then you varnish the egg. And you have that as a decoration in your Easter basket, which we do every year. It was always an important part of my childhood. We used to do it every Lent during growing up. We'd have Easter egg decorating sessions. Some people got very good at it. I'm not so good. This is the work of a very talented gentleman in Bradford. But they mean a lot. And I put this into the exhibition as part of Katarina's story of her remembering her roots when she came to Rochdale after the Second World War and settled and made her home in Rochdale, and how important that was for her to maintain those traditions.
Thank you for sharing that, Olga. I remember seeing those in the exhibition and they were really beautiful, fascinating objects. And it's really lovely to hear the meaning behind them and the intricacy within making them. I'm just looking at them now. They're so beautiful. Just the small details within them. It's fascinating objects. Everyone else is having a look at them now.
Yeah, I've got one, Olga. I remember you gave me one.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, I've got one.
They're so beautiful, aren't they?
They're stunning.
They're so decorative, and it's hard to believe that they're real eggs,
I know,
isn't it? And you don't realise that, I think, until you pick them up.
People are really very, very talented, and they do ostrich eggs too, which is really good. And they do very tiny eggs, rear eggs. And to me, when I see those on Facebook or wherever, the talent there is just amazing, and the patience and the designs are so intricate on these tiny eggs. I just wish I had the skill to do it.
Is it still as popular now, Olga, as it's always been?
Yes, it is. Yeah, we've just earlier on this year, during Lent, we ran a workshop of over 4 weeks of egg painting at the Ukrainian Centre, and they were all very, very well attended by everybody. And because we advertised far and wide, it wasn't just the Ukrainian community who came to them. We had the wider community, and one of the ladies who used Touchstones in the art group, she brought some of her friends along, and they've had a great time doing it too. So, yes, it is popular.
I'd love to have a go at it.
I was thinking
I
the
would.
same
I
thing.
don't know if mine would look anything like that.
Should we all go egg painting?
Yes. Wait.
I'm more interested in the technique as well that you talked about, the wax.
Yeah.
So it's similar to like batik.
It is very similar to batik, and it's the beeswax that's used. And the I should have brought the instrument. It's like a hollow pen of metal stuck onto a piece of wood, and you put the wax into the hollow, and it's got a very thin opening, and you heat the pen in the candle, and then you put the wax onto your egg. I mean, it's just fascinating the way it's done.
Look at YouTube.
Yeah.
And there are some people who are very clever and can draw the circles asymmetrically freehand. If I do a circle without putting a thin pencil line, and I would start there, and it would end up there on the other side. So, I've not got that patience, the ability to do a straight line. I can't do a straight line anyway, but some people can do that. But very intricate designs, you will need to do guidelines. But it is very relaxing, and it takes you out of the zone because you have to concentrate on what you're doing.
Thank you for sharing that, Olga. I think my Friday night is sorted by watching videos of this on YouTube and learning more about it. Sarah, this object is absolutely huge.
Yes.
I think this is one of the larger, heavier items within the collections, I believe.
It is, yes. So we're looking at a marble sculpture called Venus Reclining, and it's a very, very big piece of work, and it shows a white, slim, nude female figure who's laying in a very relaxed but quite suggestive position. So it was made by a Genoese artist called Santo Vanni in the 1800s, and it featured in our Whose Voice exhibition. So it's a very typical object from this period, and it portrays a usual story lots of museums tell in the UK of a white, wealthy, patriarchal history. And it demonstrates that our collections are not reflective or representative of our communities. So it was donated to the gallery by a member of the Heap family. And the Heaps were a really wealthy family who lived in Rochdale, made the money in the cotton spinning trade. Robert Taylor Heap, who donated this object to the collection, has been described as being the first donor of paintings to Rochdale Art Gallery. And he made many donations between around 1901 and 1913, which this work is of one. His brother, Richard Heap, also gave watercolours to the collection, and another family member, Charles Heap, donated the Egyptian objects to the museum collection here. So that's a collection of around 3,000 objects that tell the story of everyday Egyptians. So no gold coffins or anything like that, but a really interesting collection of vessels and jewellery, just to illustrate how ordinary people were living in Egypt. So going back to Robert Taylor Heap, through his wealth, he was able to travel and was one of a growing number of middle-class travellers who journeyed around the world. And his travels influenced the purchase of artworks. The donation of these works was a way of educating the people of Rochdale. It showed them different parts of the country and the world, and it was a way of educating them, I suppose. But it was also a way of increasing Robert Taylor Heap's status in society as well, to let people know how wealthy and educated they were themselves. The sculpture was displayed in the gallery for many years, and it was displayed on this huge wooden plinth that had the name of the donor on the front of it. So visitors would have come into the space and they would have gazed in awe at this female. It's been in our store for many years, and it's got dirty over that time. And it's displayed now, not on its plinth, but on a wooden crate.
Yeah, it's such an interesting object. I believe it was cleaned, wasn't it, Sarah, for the exhibition, and that took quite a long time for the team to do that.
Well, it was cleaned during the exhibition, so it was important for Simeon Barclay to show it as it was in storage, really. But we did clean it on certain days for the duration of the exhibition, so visitors could come in and interact with us at that time too.
That's really interesting. We'll jump back into that exhibition and as we go along. So now I'm interested to look at the object you've brought along with you, Liz.
My object is actually a book. One of my favourite books, Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. I've brought this in. This is the original copy that I got in the 80s when I was in my teens. And it's a book I've read several times. And I brought it really because I think it represents for me the importance of having a variety of voices. Obviously, the Bronte sisters, they didn't write under their own names at that time because women were considered to be novelists. So they had to pretend to be men to get published. And it just sounds so wrong now, given how long this has lasted. And, it's enduring in lots of different ways. But yeah, for me, it represented a young person, how important it was for women to have their voices heard. And I knew from quite a young age that I wanted to be involved in the arts and that I wanted to be a writer. But as a young working class girl from Bradford, I thought, how's my voice ever going to be heard? So it kind of inspired me because they came from up the road from where I was. And I thought, if these Bradford girls can do something, then maybe I could. And it sounded like a bit of a fantasy at the time, but, I'm lucky that I have managed to actually write and do what I absolutely love. So it was that. But also at the same time, before I discovered the book, I'd heard of the song Wuthering Heights by Kate Bush.
Great
and
song.
It wasn't, at that time, I didn't realise as a very little girl in the 70s that it was a book. I just thought it was this song by this really kooky kind of singer. And I remember my mum telling me at the time, well, she's still in her teens because she was a teenager when she did the album. And that's always inspired me that we shouldn't overlook young people because look how amazing and how enduring Kate Bush's work is. And now with Stranger Things and stuff like that, she's kind of hit a new audience again. But if you think of some of her songs like, Man with a Child in His Eyes, she was 13 when she wrote that song. Gosh. It's incredible. So yeah, it just keeps reminding me, I think, that, everyone's voice matters. If we're all given the right resources and nurture, we can produce really interesting things. I feel like everyone's got a story in them. And that's kind of what I felt I was bringing to the Whose Voice project. It was something that we kind of co-created. And it's quite scary starting with a blank piece of paper. But in some ways, I like starting with Olga, you're nodding. Scary.
It was very scary.
But I've done it enough times to know that, you've got to really trust the people that you're working with and say, your story's important. We can dress it up, we can, develop it, but let's just start with your story. Ordinary stories, everyday stories are really, really important, rather than me coming in as a writer and saying, well, I'm writing a script because I'm a professional. I like to think of myself as a wordsmith. I'm very good at putting words together, but you need the story, and the story comes from you and it comes from me. So, I really like approaching a process with a blank sheet and saying, come on, what we all bring into it? What can we create together? So, I really enjoyed the project for that.
Thank you, Liz. I am a massive fan of Kate Bush and actually have a big picture framed in my living room of her.
Yeah, she's one of my all-time faves.
But it's a really nice link to the theme there. And I think you've all touched upon your involvement in that project in different ways. I guess, like Olga, you've spoken about sort of the story and tradition within those objects. And Sarah, you've given a real insight into the relevance to our existing collections. And Liz, you've sort of spoken about your involvement in that and how you've given space to other voices and how you sort of do that as a craft. But I wanted to sort of just put it on the table for all of you to talk about a bit more, maybe to start with you, Sarah, to talk a bit more about how Whose Voice came about and why it was important for Touchstones to put this exhibition together and what it was about.
Yeah, definitely. I suppose for us, we know that our collections aren't representative of our communities. And we wanted to explore that. So we asked Simeon Barclay to come in and have a look at our collections and reflect on that for an exhibition. So he came in and spent quite a lot of time here in the stores, uncovering different stories and rummaging around and thinking about things in lots of different creative ways. And then that resulted in part of Whose Voice exhibition. So there were 3 elements to Whose Voice. In the end, it was Simeon Barclay's exhibition. It was Your Voice, which was a way of us trying to get people's stories and representing people a little bit better that way. And then it was the Echoes part of the exhibition, which was the part that Liz and Olga were involved with. So it was a chance for us to get some collections out through Simeon, things that we've not been displayed for many, many years, things that have been in store up here for a long time, for as long as I can remember. And Venus Reclining was one of those objects. And it was a way for him to try and make people think about seeing themselves reflected in the collections. So there were lots and lots of mirrors from the collection that he showed. And everywhere you looked when you were in the space, you would see yourself reflected amongst the collections because there was lots and lots of objects as part of the exhibition.
Thanks, Sarah. That's really nice sort of like intro into why this work's important. I'm just wondering, Liz and Olga, did you want to talk a bit more about, I guess, like how and why you got involved in the project and sort of what it meant to you?
I was persuaded by my peers and my colleagues from the Ukrainian Association, from the Ukrainian Women's Choir, who'd been involved in a project earlier, which was porcelain tacks and concrete feathers. Mm-hmm. And we went down to London for the premiere of that film. And I was just, you're going to do this? And I said, no, I did. And it was a challenge because I'm not very creative and it was difficult getting my head around it. But in the end, I decided it would be a good way of telling how Ukrainians came to Rochdale and decided to settle in Rochdale, which is why my part of Echoes was based on my mum's experience of arriving in Rochdale. And it was a story that I'd never really heard until just after Ukrainian independence, when my mum and I went back to visit her family in Ukraine, and they weren't very backward in coming forward, asking them, what's this and what's that and what's the other. And this story developed, and I just found it quite traumatic, really, because nothing had ever been said. And yet, suddenly, this is why I'm here. And connecting back with my Ukrainian roots. So I just thought it was quite important to tell that story. There were funny parts of learning English. There was a funny story of how my mum learnt English with one of the workers at the factory where she was working, who tried to teach her how to say, excuse me. And she I've got it. And he saw sort of a few days later, he says, what do you say? And she'd completely forgotten and said to him, kiss me. So he kissed her on the cheek. And off he went laughing at her. She never forgot, excuse me, to her dying day. And she used to love telling that story because it made her laugh. It made everybody else laugh. And what I found really interesting was the other people I met who I would never have probably come across if it hadn't have been for the Echoes. Ola's story, Kathy's story,
Kay.
Absolutely fascinating stories of how they managed to get to Rochdale and how they made their lives in Rochdale, which were just as equally as poignant as my own story. So I gained a lot from that and an understanding of how multiculturally diverse Rochdale really is. So it was a great experience once I'd got over the nerves. Yeah.
That's
and the shock of almost having to write our own script to begin with. Yes.
That was a shock for everybody, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Thank you, Olga. It's really lovely to hear about why and why that was important for you, and really hearing about the importance of the stories that you wanted to tell, and you recognise that, and I know you worked really closely with Liz on developing that, like you mentioned. Liz, do you want to talk more about how you sort of how this project was for you? And
I mean, it was brilliant. It was a lot of fun. I've not been in Rochdale that long. At that time, I'd been in Rochdale just over a year. And so it was a great introduction for me to some of the communities in Rochdale. I think one of the things, Olga, you'll probably agree with this, it kind of coincided with what was happening in Ukraine as well. And we didn't know that when we started out on the project. So that was quite poignant. What do you think?
Excuse me for interrupting. I found that when we did that first performance, it was just after the invasion of Ukraine. Yeah. And I did find that very, very traumatic, as you know. Yeah. But it was a story that still needed to be told.
Yeah.
Because what happened to my parents was happening, and my mother was happening again to millions and millions of people who were internally displaced, who were crossing borders for no real reason. Yeah. So it was important.
Yeah, it was difficult though as well, and I appreciated you sharing it because it was really emotional. Yeah. So, I mean, we approached it, nobody had to tell their own stories. It just so happened that everybody wanted to tell the story. And we started out with this idea of having a little bed sit and thinking about the number of bed sits and rooms across Yorkshire, well, across Rochdale, but the whole of the north, and how many people have occupied those rooms, particularly people who are migrants. Often people arrive in the UK and they'll stay in a room or a small house or something. And we thought, there were lots of stories that go through the same room. So that was kind of our starting point. And I love the story you shared, Olga, about your mum having to share a room with women and having to step over the beds that were that tight, which mirrors my mum's experience when she came from Jamaica. So it was brilliant finding this kind of, I don't know, this echo almost in lots of people's stories, whatever their cultural background. And also that echo of, like you just said, what happened, 70 years ago, kind of happening again. So yeah, there was lots of that. But I really enjoyed just the process we went through in learning to write some of those stories. So we started with saying, what do you like about Rochdale? What stands out for you? And everyone just started sharing bits of stories, but then decided to slightly fictionalise some of their own. So Ola was talking about a Nigerian prince arriving in Rochdale, and his dad wanting him to, live as a normal person and understand how privileged he is. But through that, Ola was saying how he's actually from kind of like a noble family in Nigeria, like a lot of Nigerians are, and how life here is very different, customs are very different. The way people speak to each other are very different, that we don't understand that, there are many royal families throughout Africa. So that was some learning for us. That was interesting. And then Kay talking about what it's like to be someone who's care experienced, what it's like if you leave local authority care and then suddenly you're in a bed sit, and how lonely that can be, not knowing where you belong, not knowing who your family is. So, and then Kathy sharing a story about what it's like to be a migrant and having to flee a country and find refuge somewhere, but having this massive profile back in your home country, but here feeling quite invisible and quite anonymous. So there was this lovely breadth of stories, which just reminded me of how diverse, this town is, and that we need to get more of these stories out. We need to start seeing, when we see people in the street, we don't always recognise what's behind them or what they're carrying with them as well. So I thought it was a brilliant space for that.
I think as well, what was really interesting for me as being part of this project was seeing the workshops that you were working on and being part of one of them, and feeling really uncomfortable because performance for me is difficult. But then seeing you actually perform in the gallery space and the audience is watching you do this and watching how your confidence had grown through these characters and then these objects coming into our collection, the end of it is just wonderful.
Yeah, because that was the thing as well, yeah. We all brought objects in that meant something and that had a story around them. And there were quite a range of objects, from a camera that had been taken out of the collection to brought my crochet blanket in, I think, and my grandma's prayer book from Jamaica. And you had your eggs, Olga, and you had quite a few things, actually.
There was a prayer book and there was a picture with a rushnichok, which is an embroidered piece of cloth that Ukrainians use to decorate holy pictures in their homes.
Yeah. So I think just having those objects and looking at objects and knowing how much memory they hold for people, how much story's in there, it was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Great. I think it really painted a beautiful picture of what this project is and really thinking about the value of object, but the story within them is the powerful thing, isn't it? Sarah, I wondered if you wanted to talk more about how this is kind of impacted the way that we work as a museum. And I know that we've been thinking about within that project as well, people sharing their stories and objects and what work's being done around that.
Yeah, so as part of this project, we had open days where people could come in and bring objects with them, or they could just simply come in and tell us a little bit about themselves, and we would record that information and it would come into our collection if that's what the visitor wanted to happen. So I suppose it's really informed how we are going to be collecting in the future. Now we're looking for people's oral histories. We're looking for objects from people so we can tell that story about what we've just been talking about different people coming and living together here in Rochdale. So that's a project that we're going to be taking forward that started here.
I was wondering, Olga and Liz, I know you've picked up on some of the challenges you experienced during, the time of when this project was happening within Ukraine, Olga, but what were some of the challenges about making this work and working in this way with collections, and as a theatre maker, sort of, Liz, animating what usually can be quite static spaces, museum spaces, and what that kind of process was like for you?
I think the major challenge when you start with a blank piece of paper is you don't know what's going to happen. So you've got an end date and you're hoping that you'll have something, but you don't want to put that kind of pressure on people. So you want people to feel motivated and encouraged to do something. I mean, Olga said she's not a creative person. She's actually a very creative person, but she arrived in the space feeling like she wasn't naturally that. So I think there's that job to do. So there was some of the skills development. I didn't know the group until I met them in the space. So we had to do, you've got to build rapport and help people to feel that they can actually do it. But also not be too enmeshed to an outcome. Because if you're co-creating something, you have to accept the fact that at the end, everyone might say, do you know what, we don't want to do this. And you've got to really be thinking on your feet, thinking, right, if we don't do a live performance, what will we do? What will we get out of this? So I think that's really important, because I think often when you do work in communities, people can feel very... people can feel used. I can't think of a better word. It can be really extractive. Give us your stuff, give us your memories so we can use them and look good. Rather than we're really wanting to build something here. We're really wanting some change to happen. So I hope people felt like they were part of things. We spent some time going around the store and looking at different things, which was really interesting. And I think through the process, the group got to know the staff a bit better. And, so I hope it was more than just we did a performance, built some really good relationships with people. It's been really lovely. I've been to Ukrainian church since then and did a reading there, which was really nice. And I've stayed in touch with everybody from the project. And I would like to think that they'll be open to doing other things in the future. Maybe not acting, if they're not for acting, but at least having their voice now. I feel like their voice is there in some way, shape or form.
I'll act, I'll do a reading, but I won't sing.
Yeah. But I think so. It started a conversation, which is what I think it's really about. It's not just, oh, we did a good thing, or we did a performance. It's, are those people still involved? Does their voice matter enough to keep them? Keep speaking to them. What will it leverage for future? Will more people feel welcome? And whose voices are still not represented? Who else do we need to be going out and talking to? So it was challenging in some ways, but and again, if you're working with professional actors, I say professional as in paid, it's different because they're paid to come up. I mean, everyone was compensated for the time, but not at the level as being an actor, or and so we didn't have that tight schedule. People have got other things going on. There was the Ukraine war, and Olga was obviously part of supporting loads of people as part of that. So I was really aware, Olga, of those external pressures, but you were adamant that you wanted to stay involved. And I really appreciated that because it was live. This was a live situation for you.
In many ways, it was an outlet. It was like a pressure valve. I'm going at Touchstones, I'm doing a live performance. It's my chance to just step away from that. So that was very positive. And again, it was just reinforcing the story of people who came. And the fact that it had been filmed and recorded, and that was running through at other times when we weren't doing the live performances, I thought was also very good and important.
Yeah, I think it was important, wasn't it, for visitors to be able to connect the three different elements of the exhibition together, which is why the film was displayed as well. But I think you're right, Liz. It's the start of a conversation, isn't it? And we've got a lot more work to do with regards to our collection and bringing different stories from Rochdale into our collection. Yeah, we've got a lot of work to do.
I think you touched on it a bit as well, Liz, about sort of, and you have just been then, Sarah, as well, that we want to continue this work and have a long-term commitment to giving space to unrepresented stories in the collection. But just thinking about the building as it's closed right now for redevelopment, what kind of things do you hope to maybe see in or experience, and that can be anything, in the new building of Touchstones in 2025?
I think it would be interesting because we are such a diverse community. If almost you could rotate exhibitions of the different communities and tell the stories of those communities and important parts of their history that have maybe affected how that culture has further developed. I think that would be really important to see. So people just don't forget and just don't think it's, Rochdalians, white Rochdalians, that we are very, very diverse. The previous conversation touched on some of that and how food might be the centre of that, and maybe a kitchen of different types of foods from the various cultures. I think that would be really great to see.
Definitely. I think food brings us all together, doesn't it?
It certainly does. Yeah,
it really does.
I think it really illustrated as well this project, didn't it, through the group that worked together, where even though people are from different backgrounds, they've all got connections, similarities with each other and similar stories to tell.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think for the new building, I would love to see it full of people, and for people feeling that it belongs to them. Like this is our space, just people feeling like they belong, that they've got a stake in it, and that they see themselves reflected back. I love that idea of rotating exhibitions and stuff. I think that'd be wonderful. But I think also recognising that, the history of Lancashire, it's not a recent thing. Migration is not a recent thing. Sometimes you can look at exhibitions and you can think there were no black faces here in the 1920s, but there probably were, So I think it's telling a broader history, of, Chinese people have always migrated to Lancashire and stuff. And just some of those stories, I think it'd be brilliant so people get a rebalanced history or a more accurate history of the communities here.
Definitely. I think there's some great suggestions. We can But the thing is, we've all been working on this stuff together, haven't we? So it'd be lovely to continue that in the future with all of you in lots of different ways, because there's lots of like really interesting ways and important stories that are hidden in the collections that need to be told, because that is the story of Rochdale, really, isn't it? Sarah, do you want to tell us a bit more about sort of the reactions from audiences and the public for the exhibition, how people kind of engaged with the, you mentioned about people donating their stories within that space.
Yes, so people definitely love the performances. They love that element of the show. And I think people really like to see lots and lots of the collection out as well. But we did struggle to get people to come in to share their stories with us. We've definitely learned that we can't expect people to come to us. We need to go to them.
One of the things that I think was really successful, we had a student called Innie, who was 15, and as a kind of extension to the project, she did some interviews with her co-students at school, at Fairlinge School, so 14 and 15-year-olds, and she spoke to 20 of them about objects that were important to them and what they would be known for, and to tell a story around that. And we did that as a mini exhibition on the side of it. So she photographed all the objects, she had all the conversations, and then we displayed them in the gallery. And I thought that was really important, because those young people hadn't been in the museum before, but they all came to look at their own work on the wall. And they came because they felt, I want to see what we've all done. And then found that it was actually not a scary place at all. So I think, taking things out and having people, having people's peers doing some of that work could be a real bridge to engagement, I think.
Yeah, I think it's really important for us to address and think about as a cultural space, as a hub, as a museum, that we shouldn't just be expecting communities to come into our space and donate stories. And I think we need, we've learned from that, and we're always learning from that. But I think they're really good examples as well, Liz, that you've mentioned about going out and investing time in communities to sort of, think about the barriers people face in accessing these spaces. But actually, like you said, when you've built that trust or invested in people and given them space to tell their own stories, people then feel proud, like a sense of pride, don't they? And they feel like they have ownership over a space. And we have to find and be a bit more creative about how we go out and meet people where they're at, rather than expecting them to come to us.
And we'll be doing a lot more of that when we close the building, because we won't have this building for us to expect people to come to, will we? So we'll be out there with our collections on the ground, talking to everybody.
There's been a Ukrainian community in Rochdale for the past, it's nearly 75 years now. We settled here after the First World War. Well, our parents settled here after the Second World War. And in 1946, the Association of Ukrainians in Great Britain was established. And this was the major representative body of Ukrainians in Great Britain. And its role really is to promote our culture, our traditions, and to support each other and to support Ukrainians back in Ukraine in whichever way we can. And we do that by commemorating national historical events. We always celebrate the birth of Taras Shevchenko, who is the equivalent of William Shakespeare. There's always a commemoration. We always remember the Holodomor, which was what people call Stalin's famine, in which 7 to 10 million people perished in between 1932 and 33. So we always remember and keep those in focus and highlight them. And earlier on this year, we did a commemoration of the first year's invasion of Ukraine by Russia. So there was always that. But our focus very much changed on the 24th of February, where we opened our doors. And I have to say thank you to Rochdale Borough Council, Metropolitan Borough Council, and to the people of Rochdale for all the support they showed us. As chair of the Association of the Rochdale branch, it was sorting out the collections of aid, getting aid out to Ukraine, working with the local groups, talking to local groups, going collecting checks, which was the nicest part of the job, because just prior to the invasion, the association had launched the Help Ukraine appeal, which was plodding along very nicely. And then come the 24th of February 2022, it skyrocketed. And in the year since it was launched, over a year, £3.5 million has been raised, which has been shared with 3 charity partners in Ukraine. There's one which is AICM, which is a WHO recognised charity. There's Red Cross Ukraine and there's Caritas. And they are working on the ground, and they were managing to get hygiene packs, medicine packs out to the people where they needed them. They were working underground in Kyiv and in Kharkiv, where they got the initial bombing. So that's been really great. So it's a huge, huge thank you to everybody who has donated to that fund and supported that fund. And it's also a huge thank you to the people of Rochdale for the support that they have given the Ukrainians in terms of sponsorship and opening their homes. We've had over 60 families who've come to Rochdale under the Homes for Ukraine scheme, and it's been a pleasure to welcome them into our Ukrainian community and to learn their stories and get to know them.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming on the Touchstones tapes and sharing your really fascinating and interesting and very emotional stories and powerful stories. And thank you for sharing your objects with us today as well. I'd love to be able to chat to you all loads more about all of this, because it's all so fascinating, and learn more about it. But I'm sure those conversations will continue. But I just wanted to give you the opportunity, if any of you wanted to plug or promote anything, or where can we find out more about the work you do? Maybe Liz, if you want to tell us more about Theatre in Flow.
Yeah, so Theatre in Flow is a cultural organisation. We mainly do theatre. That's not always about performance. It can be about using theatre to build confidence. We work a lot with people who've experienced severe and multiple disadvantage. So people who are perhaps going through recovery from addiction, or people who've had to flee their homes for various reasons, or might be homeless. We've run a group called Women's Supper Club, which sounds very grand, but it's very open to any woman. We meet currently at Touchstones every Wednesday evening, 6 till 8. We have a bit of food, and then we do some drama games. We basically try and build confidence and, build kind of creative energy, because like Olga said, lots of people come along and say things like, I'm not a creative person. Then in a few weeks, they're dancing around the room. So we use theatre, arts, crafts, music. Recently, we've written some songs together. We've done a printing workshop. We do theatre trips. And it's all about helping people to be less lonely, to be perfectly honest. We do work with young people in the community. We run an archival project in Bradford, which collects stories from the Caribbean community. We're developing a bus at the minute, which is a longer story for young people, a wellbeing bus for young people in Kirkholt. And we're just trying to be responsive. We're saying to people, what do you want? Can we make it happen? So, it's an exciting time to be in Rochdale, actually.
That all sounds really exciting, Liz. I love there's so many hats that you have.
Can I plug one more thing?
Yeah, plug away.
Really quickly. One of the things that we're wanting to do, and it's come out of conversations with people, is do a project around textiles. So we can recognise Rochdale's great textile kind of history, but also recognise that the way our clothes are made has a massive impact on the environment. But it also connects us across boundaries. I mean, I looked at my jeans the other day and it said made in Bangladesh. So I thought, there might be somebody's auntie who lives in Rochdale who's working in that factory making my jeans. So we're going to recreate a textile factory in Rochdale and invite people to come and learn to sew over a few weeks, but then share stories of their textile heritage. Mm-hmm. So that'll be the end of this year. So if anybody's interested, they can just send a message to our website, which is www.theatreinflow.com, or contact somebody at Touchstones and they can connect you to me. Contact Bryan.
Yeah, we'll put you in touch. And Olga, where can we find out more about the Association of Ukrainians in Great Britain?
We have a Facebook page, which is AUGB Rochdale. We also have a website, which is on the National AUGB website. We've got our own platform on there, and that's got all the links to all the appeals that we do and all the commemorations that we do throughout the year.
I was going to say as well, Sarah, did you want to say, about the collection store? People can see it online, can't they?
Yes.
So shall I ask you that? And Sarah, where can we find out more about the collections held at Touchstones?
So you can have a look on our website. We've got a little virtual tour that you can view on there. But you can also make an appointment to come and view the collections with us here. We're always looking for stories from people, and we're looking for objects too. So get in touch if you've got something you want to tell us.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming on today. I've really enjoyed listening to all of your amazing stories, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Bryan.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was such an interesting conversation to have for this episode, and I did actually see the performances that Olga and Liz performed in the gallery spaces, and it was so beautiful and moving and emotive to see the space animated and to bring to life those stories and objects. It's what we want to continue to do as a museum, to make it an inclusive and diverse space for all of the communities that we serve. Thank you so much for coming on the Touchstones tapes. We'll be back next month with a new episode. And until then, back to you, Katie and Rick, in the studio.
Thank you, Bryan. Hearing Olga's story there about her Ukrainian roots was just amazing, and the impact the Whose Voice project has had with helping her find connections here in Rochdale was really lovely.
I loved hearing what Liz had to say about celebrating ordinary stories too. It's okay to be ordinary. I personally love being ordinary.
That's all for this month's episode of the Touchstones tapes. Thank you so much for listening, and to all you always who have helped us make this. We'll be back next month with a brand new episode.
Don't forget to make sure you follow and subscribe to the Touchstones tapes on the app you use to listen to your podcasts. That way, new episodes will land on your feed magically and seamlessly. You can also follow us on social media. We're on Instagram at Touchstones_Rochdale, and on Facebook, just search for Touchstones Rochdale. Bye.
Bye.